Hello, everyone, and welcome to the live interview series at ArchiDiaries, which has been titled as Shades of Green. Today, we are having our eighth interview in this series, and I must say I'm really delighted and I'm already enjoying the conversation. And I'm really must say that on behalf of ArchiDiaries, we are really honored to have architect Peter Rich from South Africa today with us for this particular interview. Peter, thank you so much for accepting our invite and being with us here. I'm also glad to share that we have architect Surya Kakani, a dear friend, with us to generate a really interesting discussion after the presentation. And it's good to see you here again, Surya. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I don't want to take too much time. I'm really curious. I want to see what Peter has to present, and I'm really looking forward to that. But please allow me to say a few words about Peter Rich and also Surya Kakani. Peter Rich is a Johannesburg-based architect who attributes his learning to African spacemaking as being central to his career. In 2009, he was awarded the World Building of the Year 2009 by the World Architecture Festival Barcelona for Mapungubwe Interpretation Center in Limpopo, South Africa. For his extensive African and global portfolio of built work, Peter has received numerous awards and prizes. To name a few, he is the recipient of the UK Earth Award, the International Sustainable Architecture Award, or the Wienerberger Brick Award. In 2013, he was shortlisted for the Aga Khan Award. Peter further received the Gold Medal of Architecture from South African Institute of Architecture for his contribution to African spacemaking, and is an International Fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects and an Honorary Fellow of the American Institute of Architecture. To add just one selected exhibition to the list, Peter's work was also displayed at the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2018. In all of this, Peter finds time to teach and develop new curricula in Africa, India, Europe, and the US. In his own words, as an architect that specializes in community-based projects, Peter would like to share with students that architecture should have an inclusive approach, drawing on a community's needs, aspirations, and cultural heritage through social interaction in the design process and working towards a new urbanism that embraces both diversity and a sense of identity. Please also allow me to introduce Professor Surya Kakani. Professor Surya Kakani's practice at Kakani Associates explores architectural resolutions within a resource-conscious framework. It has also been his conscious endeavor to connect practice and academic pursuit, both informing each other. He held the position of deanship at Faculty of Architecture, CEPT University from 2017 to 2020. The title of today's talk that Peter Rich has chosen is Timbrel Vaults, Working with the Earth and Nature's Forces. In this presentation, he's going to talk about his experimentation in India with making timbrel vaulting accessible to all. I would like to invite Peter Rich for his presentation. Sir, please.
Thank you. Are you going to give me the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for the invite. And also, Shades of Green, I take it, is inspired by Peter Buchanan's 10 Shades of Green, which he did 10 years ago, which were a very good intellectual discourse about the importance of us as architects saving the world. And I really love the one he does on water. I play it time and time again. So I think the broader audience could refer to that as a body of thinking. I know Peter Buchanan well. He trained in South Africa, and he's one of the leading minds certainly in the European circuit. What I want to do today, but I do need the images on the screen as part of shared to be able to start talking. Is I want to adopt a far more practical approach to sharing with you what timbrel vaulting means, because there's a there's a number of misconceptions about it. Everybody thinks any vault is a Timbrel vault. Well, firstly, a true timber vault doesn't need steel. So it's low embodied energy because it uses the earth in compressed form or in a baked form like a brick or a tile to fly through space. Now, how does it do that? It does that because it needs to follow the mathematical discipline of the forces of nature. And if you take a chain and you hang a chain, we know that Gaudi hung forces on that and then reinverted them. And we know through his Sagrada Familia that even though he preempted before his death that concrete would come, today they've found his structural thinking working along these lines impeccable. They haven't been able to fault it. And the Timbrel vault is thought to have originated somewhere in North Africa. There's still speculation around that. But we do know that the Moors took it into Catalonia and Gaudi and others developed it. And there are whole towns like Terrazzo, north of Barcelona, where you can go where, you know, most building typologies are built in this way. And it's what people used to do. It was second nature, but then they forgot what to do. And and I'm going to share with you a number of examples. I do need the images on the screen, please, the shared screen. Can I have that? I've just got ArchiDiaries.
You can start sharing the screen.
Shall I share screen here now? Okay,
yes.
I'll press shared screen.
Yes.
And then I'll press share.
Yeah, perfect.
And schedule made easy, make it fast, zoom. I still haven't got the screen. I've got some other stuff.
You will need to select the presentation window. It will ask you which screen you want to present. When you are presenting the screen, it will ask you which screen you want to present.
Okay, well, I want to present the start of the lecture. I can call it up here, but I don't know if it's active.
You can again stop. You can stop sharing the screen.
Again. Stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah. Again. Okay. Now again try share screen. It will show you a window in which you will see your presentation. All the windows that are open in your laptop.
Okay. Let's try and do that. Okay. Shades of green ArchiDiaries. I haven't got anything. Haven't got anything.
You will need to keep your presentation open.
So I should go to my internet and open the presentation.
No, in your computer you must be having the presentation. You have opened it, right?
Yes, I opened it, but I went on to email and then opened it there.
Okay, so it's
on my desk. It's on my desktop.
Yeah, so you'll need to open that.
Okay, let me do that. But yeah, to do that, I've got to probably get out of Zoom. Just wait a minute. Let me go to Safari here. No, it says schedule made easy. Maybe what we should do is go to plan B where you show it from there and I just say next when I want another image.
Oh, I'll just a minute. I'll need to.
That's plan B.
Oh, I'll need to download. I actually don't have it in this laptop.
Because otherwise, I've got to sort of leave you to be able to open it on my my email.
I'll just give me a second. In the email.
So I'll just continue talking while you do this.
Yeah. No.
But I need to see the image on my screen and I need to say next, and then you can activate. Yeah. So getting back to Timbrel vaulting, if you take a piece of paper and you hold a piece of paper, an A4 piece of paper, it's going to flop. If you give it some curvature with your two fingers, it's going to assume a position which is slightly arched, probably upside down, but it has rigidity. And that's where the thinking came from, okay? And someone like John Uschendorf, who teaches at MIT, he, about 20 years ago, was standing in the roof of King's College Chapel in Cambridge and marveling at how this all stood up. And he had realized that in America, there were about 1,000 buildings that were built by Guastavino, which was a family contractor who went from Catalonia to America and ended up building major buildings with good architects like King, Mead and White, the Boston Library, and then, you know, Grand Central Station and other buildings using Timbrel Vaulting. He brought it to America. And then when we had the courage to do Mapungubwe, where I was looking for a cave architecture, it coincided with the fact that Izzy Benjamin, who was a great colleague who died recently in his late 90s, was working on a dome structure in Dover together with the MIT team and a nephew of mine. And they came to me and said, we'd love this opportunity to work with you. And we through being dumb and eager and youthful and enthusiastic, took the risk of building Mapungubwe. And that's what I'm going to share with you today, how cintil Scud has in India has taken a similar path of learning as you go. And John Uschendorf started a master's course for architects or engineers to learn the mathematics through computers that underpin how you do Timbrel vaulting. But I think what's happened now is the catenary you can get on an app through on the computer, and it's easy to construct a catenary anyway because you just take any chain and it assumes the space. And what I'm interested in the work that Scud is doing is that he's showing that the ordinary person or the architect, the work that Surya is going to do in the community is something that can be done just using principle and without going to the great lengths of being the mathematician. You actually become the practitioner working with the rule of the catenary and staying dear to it in section and in plan, because you're dealing with double curvature. And that's what gives it its strength. And students who tend to approach organic architecture, they tend to make the mistake of looking at it as form and thinking it's, look, more no hands, you can do whatever you like. It doesn't work that way. It's got to work with the forces of nature. And I also, the wonderful thing when I did the Venice Biennale, the wonderful, the curators who were Grafton architects, Yvonne and Shelley, they contested you as a chosen participant to quantify.
Yeah, I can share the screen, Peter. Sorry to disturb.
Okay, fine.
Just give me
I'll wait for it. They said to you as a participant, we want you to quantify the yeah, that's good. We want you to quantify what is the component of your work. And my son sat me down and said, Dad, they're not asking you for a project here. They're asking you for what is the component or the essence of your work. And you had to submit it in one A4 sheet. We submitted two A4 sheets. The first one, my son said, the whole body of your work is informed by the human body and classicism, and it's the orthogonal work. And another body of your work is informed by the order in nature, and it's the organic work. So we said there are these two things, and they actually interact with one another all the time. And I want to make the point, there's been a lot of discrediting of the modern movement and other things. Vincent Scully, as a lecturer, drew attention to people that there is an inherent classicism in most good modernist works as well. They didn't just dump classicism. It's like if you want to be a good jazz musician, you go and become a classical musician, and you then earn the right to be the person who can improvise.
Yeah, Peter, can you see the screen? The
I can see the
presentation is
screen,
on.
so I can actually say next and I can start. Thank you.
Sure.
Someone needs to activate for me.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here to
Okay,
help.
just give me the next slide. This is me looking into Africa. Remember, we were banned from the world until 94, and then we suddenly became part of the world. And in 2012, I came to India, and I've had an ongoing relationship with India because you run such similar races to us with the complexities of your diversity. And I believe we're all equal, but I believe we different, and the difference is where the interest lies, because it's where all the nuances are of how we behave as people. And as an architect, you want to know those to be able to respond to them. So this is a workshop. I'm going to talk about Senthil Kumar Das, who's a colleague in his late 40s, early 50s, who, as an inquiring mind, inspired by some of the work we did at Mapungubwe and also looking around him, has been going on his own journey, and we happened to cross paths, and we've enriched one another ever since. Next slide, please. He's called Scud. He started with some experimentation of his own as an architect, using predominantly square tiles, and created a little folly in a garden. What tends to happen with a lot of these experimental projects, you can go to the roofs of universities in America, Europe, Cambridge, and I'm sure in India, where there's always a workshop that attempts to do this over a weekend with students. But it usually ends up with something that's not usable. Next slide, please. And, you know, also as architects and students, you always look at the end product. You don't look at the process, and you don't look at the trial and tribulation of actually getting to that point where you have the polished end product. So we're going to actually take you on the dirty journey to see how it happens, and what lessons you can learn from both failures and successes. Next. And, you know, a lot of these projects involve students. You have too many students, so a lot of them stand around with their hands on their hips, not knowing quite what to do. So it's quite a interesting thing. What I normally do is say, well, we're building this module, and the next one you're going to be building unassisted, so you better pay attention. And then you get a change of attitude, and they get involved. But you can see here, you've got tiles, you've got fast drying gypsum. You've got shade structure with bamboo, which you improvise so well. But what's ingenious here, which we'll see, next slide, please. What's ingenious with cintil is that in all of these projects, the problem is how to get the mathematics right. And he actually found steel rebars as the ingenious way of creating the formwork and having them follow the principles. So even MIT and the more learned schools have suddenly thought, oh my goodness, it takes someone from India to teach us this profound common sense, you know, which I'm so excited about. Next slide, please. And you know, you just have the courage to do it. And you can see here, you've also got bamboo that has a certain level of bend in it as well. So you're improvising. And you're not going to great costs with scaffolding. And the steel that you're using, the rebars can be reused and welded and repeated. Next. Now we go to Bangalore. And here Cintil tried something in a public space, having done that first adventure, and succeeded. We can go through these fairly quickly. Next, please. Here I am with him, and I'm actually kissing his building, giving it a blessing, because it was standing there very proudly. But what has he done? He's experimented with bending earth tiles and like a weave, creating a membrane. Next. Notice it's bent in plan and it's bent in section. Okay. So I said to him, great, now that you've done this, and here's the process, and notice it's got the catenary arch at the end, it's got one in the middle, and it's got one in another place, and that gives you the profile, and then you link the apex, and then you link the side pieces. And what does it do? It gives you a formwork. It's ingenious to work against. Next. And he's working on a flat concrete plane, so the forces gather, and it wouldn't be as stable if the base was straight and not bent, because it adds to the strength, as you'll find with the piece of paper that you put in your hand. Next. And so the process goes, and then you can trim it. Next. And okay, it required a bit of a generator so that you could actually have an angle grinder and maybe a welding tool, but it didn't require anything more sophisticated than that. And that's what we're looking for. That's the advantage we have in the big populated Southern Hemisphere of and India. With our labor and skill and the fact that our monetary system is not such that we can't do anything. You know, the problem with America and Australia and places is they can't afford to work with natural materials. Everything's fired in a kiln, or be it steel or aluminium or pre-manufactured, and as a sophisticated, high-embodied energy, because their money doesn't allow for you to work with the earth. We have that advantage. And it actually sets up its own psychosis. Glenn Merkert has spoken about it, where you get people who just don't have contact with natural materials anymore. Everything's slick. It's like you go to America, every university is like the inside of the latest motor car. And you actually yearn for the haptic sense of touch. You learn for the smell. You learn for the taste. I've designed some buildings where people actually go and lick the walls. Next. And then just go through these quickly. Next. These are just a celebration. Okay, next. And then Cintil obviously wanted to get, you've done this, and you think, well, what's the next adventure? And he's worked out that if you put the subsequent tiles on the diagonal, and you form subsequent herringbone patterns, you get a string. So inspired by this, and give me the next slide, he decided to be more adventurous. Okay, and everyone tries to actually do this, but what you don't realize is that at certain points, you're putting what wants to work in compression into tension, and it's going to snap. So wake up call. Next. The Care Workshop in Tamil Nadu. This is where we interacted. Next. He had done some preliminary work within that beautiful complex of buildings designed by Sanjay Moher. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful school. And just the way it deals with climate and environment, and what Sanjay's learned from the IIM that he's had the pleasure of working in, of Doshi's in Bangalore. And so here is, again, this idea of a long fluted cone. Cintil's learned that you need to actually not make the base straight side walls, you bend them. Next, you can go quite quickly. And so with those fundamental lessons, he can build. And he's also realized that it makes sense to get a more rectangular, smaller tile rather than a square tile, because it's just easier to work. Next. And here we are, your 3 first courses. Hooray. And you just keep going. And it's fast drying cement. And you've got enough guidance. And you've got one team on the other side and another team. And they might not meet directly in the middle, but if these are handmade, as these tiles are, you tend to get a much nicer effect than you do from fired tiles. You cancelling out the embodied energy, but because of the handmadeness and where they don't meet, it becomes a little bit like that beautiful mend on a calabash, where the mend becomes the artwork. Next. Okay, almost meeting. And then meeting. And then, you know, the second layer of tile to bond it next, and usually on a diagonal. And then you remove the shuttering and you overwhelm that you've actually succeeded in this. And a lot of water and a lot of mess. But behind in the corner there, every Timbrel vaulter wants to build a staircase that does this. They had a rather unsuccessful go at it, I think, overcome with enthusiasm, but maybe not the skill. And it didn't quite, next, it didn't quite mature. But they'll build it eventually. You do this and then you put the treads on it. And then you get the one that's actually spiral, which just completely is so captivating because it flies in space. Next. Okay, this is the one which we did. Next. Next image. No, sorry, I'm jumping the gun. He then went out into the field at Care and wanted, you've got the dormitories in the distance, and he tried to be very experimental here. He wanted to build something actually much bigger. So here we are. He's sort of setting it out. He's building it on the grass, but he's having the side horizontal bearers. Next, which are concrete. Next. Now you'll notice here that what happens is you get the double curvature, but when it gets down towards the ground, it starts flaring. Now that's the last thing you should do, because you take the natural force, and instead of it wanting to get to the ground, you put it in tension to go sideways. We'll see the outcome of that. Next. But, you know, I just love the enthusiasm. And also it ends up being straight, not curved at the sides. So somehow you actually contradict the principle. Next. Next. So you see, you want to give it a bit of flair, and you literally give it a bit of flair, but I'll show you what happens. Next. Here's the transfer of forces where they intersect. Now, you need to, because you've got double curvature, you need to carry those forces. If they're not going to sit on the ground and they're going to sit on point loads, they need to be carried in the direction of the forces to the ground. When you bend it like this, it wants to go straight, but it doesn't, so it's going to break. Let's have a look at the next one. Next. And it does break. It breaks at the sides and it breaks at the top. So the whole thing collapses because it's put in tension. Okay, here's the one where we meet, okay, in December 2019. And we had a wonderful few days. What we wanted to do was do something I showed them what they tend to do in Spain. Everybody gets given a piece of cloth and you get plaster of Paris and you make a shape with wire and you dip it in the plaster of Paris and voila, you've got a model of what your thing is. But to make it and to have the formwork that makes it is the perplexing thing. And we'll show you how when you get into model making in the studio, it always ends up being this gloopy, floppy thing that is not very convincing. Next. This is in Valencia, which is the home of the Catalan Vault, with some steel structures providing an end. And just go quickly through these. Next. And it's a weekend situation. Next, and you can see that you get a very nice finished product, okay, which becomes part of a yard. It's not necessarily useful to anybody, and I'm now getting schools of architecture, whenever they do something, it actually acts as a piece of furniture, which is space making. We in South Africa are finding that in a rural area, if we just introduce the whole business of access to data, in other words, an iCloud, we can actually, with a Timbrel Vault, generate a whole new public space just by virtue of that. That's where the youth are going to gather, because they can have access to data. They don't have to go and line up next to the bank in the town where they can only get data. Next. And the model building, you know, let students have a go at it. They tend to get a bit complicated. They find it's difficult to actually make the form. If you're going to put it on a printout, it really cheats because it doesn't help you with the process. Next. And this is the secret, okay? It's the catenary arch. And as I say, you can go on an app which can give you that exact thing, so you can actually play with it. And that's exactly what we did. Next. Some models were more successful than others and gave one ideas that could be explored in other ways. There's cintil on the right, students looking on. Next. And then what we did is there's a dining room, and about 600 meters away are all the residences. And the students really come and they really arrive at this point across this tarmac here, which is a service area for buses, and go into the dining and eating components which look onto a lake. So we said, why can't we build one unit a year? So we decided to build we took 5. And how can this become something that makes a ceremonial entrance and becomes something that has got water troughs in it for the cows and various other things, and seating spaces? Next. We only got enough money to build one. And then we said, it's got to be beautiful. Some girl asked me, but what's the use of this? So I said, well, it's a ceremonial entrance, and it's the place where you can probably get your first kiss from your boyfriend as a way of celebration. And you certainly can take some selfies framed by this because it's elegant and it's beautiful. Okay, so we made it asymmetrical. Okay, and we looked at it in plan, and it's great to have the computer as a tool because it actually helps you. Next. And then we said, okay, we've got these wonderful areas where we can do it. And on the right is Belinda, who's the head of the school, who was present night and day. And we said, okay, how do you actually set this out? How do you start with the mathematics? And how do you get in? We photographed the process, and we got the students involved. Next, you can go fairly quickly through these. And there's cintil lying down, just looking at scale, because we wanted to get it right. Remember, it was asymmetrical. And really, the rebars are perfect because you can weld them, you can overlap them, but you can bend them. And he solved the shuttering problem. Next. Next. And notice you've got a linear line, so you're working orthogonally, and then you inevitably involve the man who's the maintenance man and some villagers because they get empowered, and you can actually extend this whole lesson, as is going to happen with Surya's project. And here's the relationship of the dining hall across to the residences, and we're going to build on this site where we've got a little bit of unevenness, but it doesn't matter. Okay. So the process starts. Next. Okay, and we're getting the two ends right. We're getting the middle right. We're getting the central one right. And then we're doing the weaving on the side. Next. We found a flat concrete area, and it follows the same principle. Okay. And we've actually, you can see, to get this bend coming in, we put another structure outside, but you just apply logic, okay? And it's really working. And it needs a maestro like Scud to actually lead this. But then you've got the villagers and you've got the other skills that come to the table, which you're so fortunate to have and which need empowering in the context of India, more and more so. And you've got them coming to the table because there's pending rain and monsoon, and there was a cyclone going to whip off from the west coast. Next. Next image. Okay. And the tiles, when we built Mapungubwe, because we were working with Cambridge University, with one of the pupils of John Uschendorf, Michael Ramage, their civil engineering department said, let's see how weak we can make a tile. So we only made it 4 MPa with 5% cement, which was hand-pressed and cured. But you have this tradition, you've got to go to your great Buddhist temples and elsewhere. It's all lurking there. It's all there in India. You go to Hampi, you go to Mandu, you see little bits of Italy, you see what happened along the silk trade. You see the hybridity that happened and the swapping of ideas and the trying to develop an identity in one way or another. But there's this incredible inventiveness. Next. And then we go into town and you know, we experience talking about sustainability. My goodness, this is unbelievable. India can feed more people well than anybody else in the world. Okay. And have fun in doing it. And then there's a ritual practice with which way you fold the banana leaf. Now, it's just fascinating to us who come from sort of Anglophile Calvinist sort of backgrounds to actually experience this wonderful level of love and sophistication. Next. And then, you know, you go into the town and, you know, flowers just become something. I mean, one of my great experiences was being taken at 5 o'clock in the morning in Bangalore to the flower market and watch the unfolding. Next, you can go through these quite quickly, one after the other. Yeah. You know this and you take it for granted, but it's magnificent and it certainly is about beauty. So when Scruton talks about beauty, and saying the modern movement destroyed things, it's come to India because it's all still there. Next. Next. And you need to, while you're doing something like this, visit the temples and visit the flower market to get away and then come back, because it's part of the journey. It's not just being there. Okay. Next. Some mistakes are made, they actually corrected, and then you actually get a real production line going, and you find who's good at things, and they take a leadership. And what you need is you actually need we hope to have several of these being constructed at the same time, but we didn't have the budget. And hopefully after COVID, we'll build the subsequent ones as an exercise each year until the whole entrance sequence is ready. Next. There's cintil in his element, because it's really working. And just the discovery that your second layer of tiles goes on the diagonal, because that's how the forces work. And then you put the other one going the other way. So it gives you this triple strength. But you have to decide on which way you want the tiles to go to read underneath, because that's your ceiling. Next. Next. And there's the ooze. You'll see when we worked for Prince Charles in London, he wanted the ooze, but you can clean it up. And yeah, students started really participating, realizing we need to get the tiles, we need to hand them on, there needs to be a production process, we need to coordinate. Great. Next. And yeah, the diagonal. Next. And you don't need particular skilled masons. It's quicker, but the students started getting pretty good at it. Next. We got our structure up because the rains are coming and we want to work while it's raining. Next. And suddenly we've still got our spider's web of, I like to use the analogy of a spider's web, because a spider's web's got a structure to it. Okay, it serves a purpose. Here, Cintil has come up with a formwork that follows the mathematical lines of force, and it serves as support structure and guidance and can be reused. Next. And then the trimming that happens and the finishing. Next. And it happened to pick up nicely with the afternoon sun. Next. And stands very nice and complementary to the very orthogonal architecture of this particular Sanjay Moe building. Next. And celebrates the tree. Next. And the classrooms are open like this. So you have outdoor spaces, and you have all the lessons from the IIM in the School of Architecture, which are marvelous because you're in a village. And there's that web between inside and outside. My book talks about that. Johanni Pelasma talks about the in my own work, the weave that I do between indoor and outdoor spaces, but also the weave between understanding different geometries that coexist with one another. But it's very, very worked through and understood with iteration after iteration after iteration, that it becomes this very rich environment. Next. And this is meant to play, but you know, we got into dance. Students found it very funny, but it's fine. I'm from the 60s. Next. And then just a reminder back of these 5 elements here, we built the one, not the top one, but the next one. And you'll see once you build others, you start looking at permutations. If you build them identically, you can get this very nice walkway where you have head height, where you have these subspaces that occur. And then they start defining spaces of their own where you can go and sit. And so you can take a place that has no articulation. And I'm going to certainly do one of these as part of this rural renewal that we're doing, regeneration in villages, where you give the older youth a place and you actually bring internet there, okay? And an internet that is that can be utilized by them. It's not just the international one. It's utilized by them and their community. And it's good for Africa. Next. Okay, just a reminder where we came from. Next. So there's the theory, there's the mathematics, there's the practice. Get hold of the BBC program called The Code, and it shows you there's maths in everything. There's even maths in the way a flock of birds fly. There's maths in the statistical number of fish a fisherman's going to catch. There's maths in the way people move across a big space. And if you put an object in it, how it alters that. Next. And you don't have to become a mathematician. You just got to actually think. When we won the Earth Pavilion in London, Prince Charles asked us if we could, he was going to have a tea party, and he wanted, in this tea party on his lawn of Lancaster House on the Mall, he wanted to demonstrate to the English innovative ways in which you could think differently about being green, for want of a better word. Next. And we built this. We had 14 days from the phone call to walking through the building. So we had to think, we had to design, we had to think about flying a hand press over there, making the tiles, and then what sort of formwork do we do? We bypassed all the conventional ways. We had the organizers of the Earth Awards seconded a project manager who we sent on holiday to Italy as a way of getting rid of him, because it would never have happened. And we got hold of a colleague of mine, Tim Hall's, some set designers who quickly made some formwork for us. We didn't have Scud with us at that time. And we got bicycles, and we got a builder, and we got a female mason, and we just did it. Next. And, you know, we needed the curvature, and they really liked the fact that we, this idea of a series of cones that went through one another. Okay, next. And this has led to lots of subsequent designs. Next. Next. And you can see here, you got the wide barrel vault with the sides straight, but that's going to be floppy. Okay, you need to go to the right-hand side where your two sides are bent as well to give it strength. And you also need to bend the top of it. So then you've got strength happening in section, in elevation on the roof plane, and in plan. And that's the way to go. Next. And I did some drawings very quickly and sent them over. And Prince Charles insisted on these pieces of timber, which we used from it's the intrusions into the game parks, which it's called sickleborse. You take it out because it's an intruder. We used that, but we ended up using cherry blossom here because he liked the roughness of it, because he had seen it and it captured. And notice how we bend this to actually form the gutters. But as soon as you bend, you've obviously got to get into being more skilled as a mason, because your tile has to be cut. Next. And here we had it straight sides, doesn't work. There we had it like that, works better, but doesn't work. But this was on the computer. We solved it in an analog way. Next. And there we are. It was a temporary structure, so we actually put down chipboard, which was raised. We built on the chipboard, and then we took it from there. And all our detailing is done this way. Next. And these pieces of timber we used in between the tiles, we used as the flooring and for the exhibition. So we reused every aspect of it. Next. That was a great success. And here, it rains in England intermittently, so we put shelter over. And that's how we did our formwork, just done by set designers digitally, no problem. Next. You got ladders and we started, okay? And a lovely young woman in her 30s from the south of England just was in her element. Next. And it worked perfectly. Next. I think it's the end product. Next slide. Yeah. And it's interesting how we did one of these in Chicago and for a billionaire, and he loved the ooze because he says everything's so high embodied energy and machined in America. People don't know how to make buildings that are delicious, that you can smell, you can touch, and you can eat. And I want the ooze to happen because it gives a shadow line and it gives character. And here you can see we've actually taken what we used as the elements for making the tiles, and we've used them in the exhibition, and we've used them in the floor. Next. And people loved it. Okay, next. Okay, so this was meant to be dismantled after a couple of weeks. Because of the 14-day time frame, we couldn't even think of how we could, even though it was made in 3 sections, transport it somewhere else with a forklift and put it down. We just didn't have time to think on our feet. Next. Okay, now this is at the start of COVID, we got this request from a wealthy person who had a dream from London. Next. He'd seen our work. I was in India. This is really done by the office. It's not my work, but you have to give some leeway to the office. But basically, he wanted to design a dome where at a metaphysical level he could come to terms with, and philosophical level, his place in the world. He wanted places of accommodation along a cliff face, sometimes hidden, and that he wanted a tunnel that could go onto a water hole. So, and it had to be positioned so that the animals couldn't smell you, and you could get to a hide where you could photograph them across the water. We haven't had contact because of COVID, but I think this will go ahead. And it's actually not far from my Mapungubwe Center, but on a private reserve. Next. But I'll show you why I'm showing you this. I'm also showing students, you need to dream. How do you, at the edge of a cliff face, just create a shelf off the cliff face that's not obvious? What form does the dome take? What sort of accommodation do you do? How do you start reading the landscape? And if you look at the section down below, how do you learn from Gaudi how you can make this carved out thing along the landscape? Next. Next. This is particularly ugly and doesn't work. We all know when you enter a circle, the ideal way is not to do it like you do the Pantheon. There are other ways of doing it. I find this particularly naive, but it's okay. Next. He didn't want any steel. He didn't want any concrete, not even in the base. Okay, next. But we've won his heart, and we will get there, and it'll be something much, much nicer. Next. Next. He's had a lot of time to think about it. And then this is learning from Gaudi's Park Well, how you create, a very nice place to sit and have a drink and look out and view the landscape, and you're not intrusive. Next. And how do you ventilate it? Okay, and what form should it be? I would do this differently, but anyway, next. Next slide. Next slide. It says much the same thing. Okay, and then what does it look like from the top? Do you make this look like an anthill? What are you focusing on? Next. And yeah, and where do you serve drinks? And is it part of the landscape? Is it an attachment like the buildings across the way stepping down, or is it in? Next. And then this tunnel that gets covered with sand, it has spaces that light that have in, but you have different places where you, from behind glass, can photograph animals in the most incredible positions. This is part of his fantasy. What I did is when I ran a workshop with Valencia just before COVID, during COVID, sorry, I ran a workshop with them November last year. We actually took this and we had different students and we gave them each a slice of the tunnel to design, either in an analog way or on computer. And we had half an hour report backs on process. It was a very successful exercise. Next. They actually got to terms with the principle. What is it along there? Can you come up? Can you come down? Where do you look out? How do you ventilate? And how do the animals not smell you? It was nice. Next. And yeah. And next. So this is where you start. You know, a client wants to see what your proposal is. At conceptual level, you don't want to show too much. Do you do a 3D model that's sufficient for you to do some freehand drawings? Next. And you're fulfilling someone's fantasy. Next. Next. Okay, so this is the dream for the view, and this is the model. Now, before we go on to the next slide, we were phoned on Friday, and we're going down this next week, 7.5 hours, to a place in the middle of nowhere, west of Kimberley, where the biggest solar field in Africa is being built as a renewable energy source. And they want a visitor center on a hill. The environmentalists have sent us the most horrible engineer-designed concrete thing that just sits there as this building, but has no poetic. So we've got a Skype call on Monday with the CEO and saying, you're harnessing the sun. That's what you're doing. And as scientists, you're doing an incredible job. Now, if visitors are going to visit this, why don't we actually do a dome with an oculus so you can experience? And when you get there anyway, you've got this blinding sun, okay, with flat, long horizons. Why don't we take you into a world where you can communicate Ra, the sun god? You know, the 25th of December, the Three Kings, the Immaculate Conception, the dying on the cross. It's from Ra, the sun god of the Egyptians. And there are about 25 religions that have interpretations of that. Okay, and why don't we show the astronomy of Africa? And why don't you come into this sunroom where it's dark, and then you ramp down, and then you get to a veranda that's actually made of your solar panels, which you can touch, and then you can interact with the view. So we're preparing ourselves for how we sell the stream. And I said, why don't you show the world that you can use low-embodied energy? And let's see if we win, okay? But you've got to have a narrative, and you've also got to have the personality to be able to sell something. Next. Yeah, and then we can go on. So as I said, we took slices of this for a digital Zoom call with interactive half an hour explanations of how you were doing. And it didn't stand naked like this. It was covered by soil. Incidentally, if you cover it by soil, it gets even more strength if you've done it correctly. Next. So it wouldn't be an intrusion in the landscape. Okay, next. These are the sleeping carols, horrible drawings. Next. better drawings. Okay, so how can it look as though it's always been there? Next. And you don't have to put stone. And then I'm just going to show you, you've probably seen through the social media the beginnings of wonderful projects. I've got a project for a place to get massage floating on water, which is the inside of a Lotus Petal, which is a project I'm hoping to realize in China. My client wrote to me and he says he's gone back through all my projects that haven't been built and he loves them so much he's going to build them all. Hallelujah, I hope that happens. But just let's have a look at this. This is recent work, beautiful work. It's the catenary, it's bowed outwards, not inwards. Love to visit it. And then there's a subterranean building further over. So, we're all learning, and here are the courtyard houses in front. Next. You can go quite quickly through this. Okay. But you can see I'm also getting more involved with pointed tiling as the exterior. And also the idea of creating an airspace so you don't get so much air, you don't get much heat penetration. And we're doing a hotel in Kampala where we're doing a cannon vault where we're allowing the heat that comes through to actually go up to an escape. Next. Okay. And, you can make holes in it so you can create the sky. And the fenestration learns from Corb, and it's delightful. Next. I'm telling my client that when I next go to China, I want to visit some of these projects. Next. And especially the one that's coming up now. Next. But notice where you break the order and where there's the intersection is where the magic happens. We'll talk about that just now, about breaking the order. Next. But it's all working to the law. Okay. Next. And this has come on the internet recently. Very beautiful. Okay, let's have a look. It's a sort of almost a medieval city. I haven't worked out what it is. I haven't worked out if you inhabit up there, but it's certainly captivating. I'm about to buy a series of ceramic pots that are like this, but this level of architecture I haven't got into. Next. Okay, and we go inside. Next one. Next one. What I like about the inside spaces is you start getting this intersection with volumes of light. Next. And it also could be from an old used material, but it's fabulous. I think these are renders. Next. Okay. Next. Furnishings are awful. These are beautiful. Next. And, you can use ribs. Gaudi showed us that he used ribs because you had to run around on the roof of the Casamila. So he used the ribs. So the ribs become structuring elements. It's in my Amazmi Woburn Center, which we just had published, which we hope to get built. Next. I'm finding that all of my seminal projects that have never been built are suddenly resurfacing in other worlds. Next. Okay, and that concludes that talk. But I just want to say, Surya showed me this book of mine was published in September last year. It's 5 years of research done by Jonathan Noble, who I taught in second year. He interned with me. I think he did one of the worst set of working drawings I've ever seen, but we got such a good price from the builder because he couldn't believe the drawings were from an architect. And he decided on an academic career. And we've had this wonderful relationship. But the book is available in India at a third of the price that it sells in the UK from a Mumbai distributor. And I can let you know who that is. But what's happening is Nandan Durgand Balsava of the Savita School, we're having a meeting this next week. And I met yesterday with Jonathan, the author, where we're taking 6 of there's 7 chapters, but the first one is an artist, a dreamer, and a clown. We all know about that, so we're taking the next ones. And what we're doing is we we're going to approach certain schools in India that are interested. And he and I are going to take each of the chapters and unpack what we believe the essential message from a theoretical and a practical point of view is from each of the chapters. Now, one of the chapters is learning from the Ndebele, or learning from African space. That has to do with anthropomorphism. It has to do with the classicism. It has to do with social order. It has to do that when you learn from the vernacular, you're not there to emulate. You're there to see how people use space and materials and then be innovative in a modern context. And it deals with how a particular people frequently, with the plan being in their mind, interacting with the world around them in a contemporary way, they create sculpture, formal gardens, painting, sculpture that's applied, sculpture that's freestanding, and they articulate space, and it's as though they had Palladius Quattro Libri next to them. Why? Because through adorning the human body, they understand axiality and duality and bilateral symmetry and front and back, which is exactly what Renaissance man did. And then the second one, forming an architectural language, the Wetrees House and Garden, which is where I live, in the piece of paradise I spent 50 years creating. There were two opposite constructs there. One was the idea of the round plum, which is from Lewis, who had gone and studied. And Lewis, through his architecture, didn't show how a building was made. He used theatre to do things, which was wonderful. And I had that idea, and it was a wonderful idea, and I was exploring it, the idea of the staircase wrapping around, the spatial interpretation with each space having its own integrity. Then I had my African spatial ideas of inside, outside, making the inside look like the outside and the outside look like the inside, and the diagonal exploration. And I fused these two theories. Now imagine what a nice theory course you could run of a project where you take a contemporary Western theory or a Western theory, and you take an indigenous theory, and you explore what you learn between the two of them to synthesize in a project. Okay, and then there are a whole lot of other ideas that we can take out of the same exercise. And Jonathan believes that everything I've ever done has been experimented in the way in my garden and in the house, in a conversation with one another. And actually, I can't show you, the computer is sitting on a mythological drawing that I'm just completing, which is the influences that have come to bear in a three-dimensional way on the site in my life, which I'll certainly, Surya, I'll share it with you when I've only just resolved the composition. Okay, so it's very, very much something that's allegorical. And then, you get onto Mandela's Yard and a social architecture. There's all sorts of lessons to be learnt there, with how you work with community, how you build a steel structure, how they do the infill component of it, how you empower people, how you work in a rural context, what you work with. And we're hoping to be appointed to do the regeneration of 42 villages 2 hours from Johannesburg, with people who are wanting to know, who are we, where did we come from, what is our identity. Colonialism and other things have actually messed with us to such a degree that we need to know this so that we can root ourselves as 21st century citizens. And why do I say this? Because it's what Indians need to do. You need to ask in your home language, what is the entrance? What is the threshold on the street? Where you put the Rangoli? What is that? Study the Rangoli. What is the access that runs through the house? How do you deal with new visitors? How do you do, if you're Muslim or whether you're Hindu or whether you're a Buddhist, whoever you are, how do you actually deal with your ritual practice, and how does it live on in your lifetime? Because that's the way we're going to make ourselves really rich. And so we will share with you, certainly Arc Daily and Surya, this program, which we're going to discuss next week with Nandan. He'll let you know. It'll be supported by the COA, of how we use this book as a teaching tool for what it was intended. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was fantastic to sit back and go through your work, and in the end, the book. And it would be interesting to see how I think I would like to invite Surya to sort of take the initiative to generate the discussion. Surya, please take the lead.
Thank you, Peter. Lovely.
Pleasure.
Lovely as always, listening to you, and it's interesting that with this large oeuvre of your work, you kind of focused on the idea of Timbrel, and the way you presented it today is the way you took it off as something that needs more attention. So you begin at the level of talking about teaching, education, basically, talking about how do we make this something that's more accessible through the student fraternity, and then slowly you proceed towards showing us to the level of which, in terms of expression, it can potentially reach through your projects and to the other projects that you shared. And I think this is definitely an interesting, a very interesting potential that because it's got what one should say craft. It's got embodied energy. I mean, reduced embodied energy, local skills. What challenges do you see in this proliferating as an everyday possibility?
Well, Surya, Scud, Cintil is the first time I've seen someone in India brave enough to actually go on a journey out of curiosity. And I want to add that he's about, I think, next month to release to India a beautiful project he's realized with a 22-meter span. Mapungubwe is 14.5 at its biggest. And he's done it on a floating platform overlooking a lake 4 hours out of Bangalore. Beautifully done. I interacted with him because I saw problems with the distribution of the forces on buttresses, which weren't picking up the forces. So we've had a interaction. Firstly, I think we as the profession need to be a lot more generous in how we actually share our knowledge. And what I'd certainly like to do with this community initiative that you're doing and the community initiative I'm doing, that we actually we continue the discourse through that work. And so Cintil is, I'm saying you don't have to feel intimidated that you haven't gone and studied mathematics at MIT, how to do Timbrel Vaulting. You can just do it, because when you go to Mexico, architects in Mexico don't use engineers. They do vaulting, just doing it. They do it empirically like Cintil's doing it. Okay? So I wanted to get back to the point, and I'm so excited by your initiative you're talking about, and congratulations on the award you've done, because it's another step saying to schools of architecture, stop making these little mushrooms in your back garden and thinking you've got it, because you haven't got it. Just do it so it can become useful and be beautiful. And yeah. I think that's what I'm saying. And I love to hear that your thing is, and it's what I would like to embrace, with these rural communities, when the older youth that are always left out of the equation, you can actually build the most beautiful series of timber vaults, which has got the nerve center of where they can get data. And through the iCloud, in fact, it can be designed as a cloud. They can actually generate a whole new urban center out of planting, and a whole new placemaking through the planting of something that just has to bring a place where you undercover can have data.
Exactly. And in fact, it's interesting that the world that had them, which is Europe, whether it is Spain, Italy, all over France, some parts, US, the world that had them, this has disappeared. And it has disappeared thanks to actually the Industrial Revolution. The idea that the skill of the hand is no longer needed for building. And it's interesting that most of our world, your world, our world, where we all work, can potentially seize this opportunity to take this particular technology forward in a way that can be far more carbon-free, economics, sustainable. You talk about it. Skill. Yeah. I mean, the whole gamut of issues that the UN is talking about in terms of its sustainable goals.
And as I said, Cintil has now done something very elegant that spans 22 meters, which is enable you to getting used to it at a whole nother level. Okay, yes. and he's done it beautifully. I just have said to him that I'm not showing his new project. It's something he must release to the world, and literally, COVID has slowed things up, but it's almost ready to publish. It's beautiful.
I'd like to come back to the first question again about the challenges. One of the things that for proliferation of something that's one of the tragedies of this kind of thing also is some of these things may remain, enticing, experientially enriching, and remain and become small pavilions here and there. But this material this technique has a far deeper potential, as I was talking earlier. And maybe the challenges for us as architects is also that we need to begin to figure out how are these things drawn, or how is this thing built, or how are services part of these whole this kind of structures. So the first step is obviously enticing it, making a whole larger body of people interested in it as a method. The second is the idea that how does it continue to remain prevalent and rooted. And if we begin to address these other issues of every day, which is simple services, how do we make homes out of these things? And I think this is where I think as schools of architecture, or even as students, or even as architects practicing, we need to be able to, because it's actually one of the things which is very easy to proliferate as skill. It's doesn't need shuttering, doesn't need steel, and it is made with extremely simple materials and pure skill. So what do you think? Do you see how have you, because you've really actually built spaces that are occupied in the reserve that you've done, and what would you like to share with us, some of the challenges there that you faced? Or
the unfortunate thing we had there was that we had money for community to actually build, and we used unemployed labor, unemployed women to make the tiles, and unemployed men to be trained to do tiling. So we succeeded in that. But the problem was that the community that was to allow the World Heronscape and Game Park, which was former farms, to be formed, were 68 kilometers away, and they didn't want to be involved. So we had to get community from somewhere else. So the dream of having acquired these skills, how could we follow up that people could apply to their homes, didn't happen in that particular case, because it was done for a National Parks Board, and then these people all returned to their homes, and there wasn't the continuity. I tried to get the possibility of a series of dormitories, so that because it's a long way away from everywhere, so that if school children come to find out about their 9th to 12th century origins, they have to, it's very difficult. They spend very little time and then rush back for the return 3-hour journey to where they've come from, if they could overnight, but that never happened. So with this rural project, we'll have a much better opportunity to take the training that happens on, say, a startup thing where you can get data as a space, and then say, okay, now let's take this and look at how we can apply it to the roofing of some homes.
Right.
Okay. And you take the skill base of the team, and you let them, because the word sustainability is when the community can actually take it on without you present and continue with it.
Yes.
Okay.
So true. Very true.
And we know the challenge, but we've got people that are desperate to reclaim their pre-colonial heritage, unfortunately, that I've actually we're also starting to tell the narrative of what that African heritage is, because it's all being distorted through the lens of the colonials to their own advantage. So we can actually use this as saying this might not have been part of your culture, but we've got corbel dwellings all over South Africa that existed at one point in time, but we all know that the circle is a problem. And we know colleagues in Ethiopia that who've had these series of domes which they tried to turn into hospitals, tried to turn into schools. The dome is a dome is a dome. It actually doesn't work because it's centrifugal, it's acoustically problematic, and it doesn't house furniture. So we need to be far more astute about it and realize that people have got. But you know what I say in India, everybody complains. When I go to Mandu, they say everybody through the government grants is now erecting these reinforced concrete double-story flat-roofed homes. Why don't they? And I said, well, why don't you, as an architect? That's the example that the commercial builder has given them. Why don't you actually come with something else that they can pick up on? And that would be a good challenge because they don't know any other option. And also the first floor coffered ceiling, which is quite over a small distance of, like, when you go to Catalonia, you've got these series of coffers on T members, which form this beautiful ceiling. That's your first floor. And what we did at Mapungubwe, we used one skin as the shutter for the concrete that was poured. Mm-hmm. And where it came down at the sides, that's where the services ran through. Yeah. Yeah. And then from an air conditioning point of view, if you've got a hole in the top, you can ventilate, okay? Because the heat's all going to go to the top.
Right. Yeah. Yep. I think this is the Timbrel is one part of the discussion, but your oeuvre of work is far bigger than this. You're amazing at your ability to I've seen you working while you're walking, like through your sketches, and what you see and what you draw at the speed at which you draw and you put out to express is something that that kind of always amazes me. And that's something that it would be interesting to talk. How do you see that as a medium that would have influenced you in the tactility that you kind of arrive at in your work? Your work is extremely tactile and experiential. And how do you see your ability to sketch the way you do come across in the actual experience of your work?
Well, Dashi, in his foreword to my book, says that Peter Rich experiences the joy of architecture through his spontaneous sketches and drawing. Influenced by his mentor, Pancho Guedes, he uses drawing in organic expression, seeking an understanding of experiencing reality through his sketches. A drawing can imbibe impressions and memories. An architect can also draw more precisely to understand scale, proportion, light quality, space, volume. I use both simultaneously. So you're not only just recording memory, you're also getting into analysis. And through the analog, you can do it very quickly. And I think the other thing is, the computer's a wonderful tool, but it can't go into deep memory, it can't go into lateral vision, and it can't go into your autobiography or into intuition. So those are all the things that make things personal. So you deny yourself access to them if you don't draw.
Yep.
Which means you need a smack, because it's stupid. You're in denial.
Yes. I think you have an amazing association with us and with this part of the world, the way you travel, the way you connect. And I think architectures in India than most architects in this country have. So we are really you spend so much time amongst us. I I would like Ayaz, if he has some questions to please go ahead. You said you had something to ask.
Yeah, thank you, Surya. I was really interested
Ayaz?
in. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah. No, I was really enjoying the conversation between two of you because Surya, I know last year you had shown the presentation and your explorations in terms of the Timbrel vaulting, and you've also been quite exploring that particular technology. So it was nice to see. I want to ask a couple of questions regarding the technique of the Timbrel vaulting. So you also showed that there was a workshop in which Senthil was trying to experiment, and the reason why it collapsed is because at the base of it was almost becoming a line, and it was not following the saddle form that it was required to have. So certainly there is something more in terms of process, form finding as to, and I'm talking about when you are taking it to, let's say, a professional, when you're trying to actually execute 14 meters, 22 meters span. So I'm interested in knowing what are the kind of tools and what are the kind of form finding techniques that you use in your process to arrive at these forms.
Well, we've tended to use these disciplines that have been taught recently on computer to architect engineers at Cambridge University or MIT University by having them as consultants. But it's usually problematic because, I'm saying to them, it's not sustainable for us to pay you in pounds as an engineer when we're working in Africa. So if you're prepared to work at our engineer's rate here in rands or in rupees, only then can you regard yourself sustainable. But also what Scud is proving is that you do need it. He needed an engineer. He worked with his principle that he has learned, but as soon as he got onto a buttress that was 1 to 1.5 stories above the ground with a floating platform, and he had to distribute at those endpoints the load of this 22-meter structure, he had to know what he was doing how he took that through those footings. And what happens is if you've got a vault like that, and the forces are going to go like this, anything below this is not doing any work. So you don't need any concrete there. So to be economical, you need to continue to be clever in the vein of the thing. And Gaudi shows us all of these lessons. He understood it absolutely implicitly. And if you go and walk in the higher echelons of the Sagrada Familia, I mean, all of those international, American and other people, they all say he preempted reinforced concrete, but they said, we haven't faulted him once because his laws he was working with nature are fundamental and they work. Okay. And they've made the concrete work more efficient because of it. But you are working in compression and you're taking horizontal forces and finding the right way for them to get to the ground so they can take bearing via buttresses or other things. And that's where I recently, I think, helped add some value to Senthil's problem when he got down to the buttress. Because you don't want to put this big lump of concrete. You want to do something that's elegant, that receives and transfers those forces in 2 directions to the ground. So it's part of a learning curve. And it just used to be second nature. I mean, I can take you to Terrasso, where I can take you into a 2-hectare factory with self-lighting, where the whole thing's Timbrel Vaulting. Okay? And it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Okay. So maybe if we get this job to do this visitor center for this one of the world's biggest solar fields, maybe the veranda can actually be their solar panels supported on Timbrel vault, on Timbrel arches. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, yeah. Go ahead, Ayaz, please.
No, please, Surya, go ahead.
No, I've just had more like a concluding thing that, it's these efforts, especially now that when he says about this solar and this becoming potentially, that, we're talking of something that's that's a pre-industrial technique. And
Yeah.
and normally when in most advancing economies, one of the challenges is always how do you keep these pre-industrial techniques from becoming obsolete?
Yeah.
And this is where I think we will have to kind of find that convergence. How how do we connect such techniques into the future, into
Yes.
how do we build it, how do we rather build it or give it meaning for the future?
Yes, well, I'm at the moment involved with cannon vaults. Cannon vaults are where you have a smaller circumference going to a bigger circumference, like a cannon, as part of the roof of a hotel over 2 bedrooms. Now, it's better for us to use brickwork there than use timbrel vaulting, okay? Because the brickwork can sort of step and it can go down. And it's still an earth form material. But why I actually chose, because of your shades of green, why I chose, if you want to look what's sustainable in Africa, we work with reeds and we work with, but we basically work with the soil or bricks with whatever we do. We don't have a tradition of timber, for instance, or necessarily bamboo, unless it's a tropical area. So the soil is something we work with, and we used to make soil roofs, even flat roofs, in the more desert areas. I think something that we also have as a challenge, which I think you must really think about, is a lot of these buildings that we look at, and there's one recently done in Niger by a woman, which is one of the most beautiful spaces. I think it might win the Aga Khan Award. It's easy, these things are more easy to do in a desert climate than they are where there's a high rainfall. And I know of the you get the Nigerian vault, which the vault from the Niger, which is not the catenary, it's circular. And I saw an American NGO get some people from Niger to build one in Rwanda. And they didn't waterproof it. And the first rains came and the whole thing just ended up collapsing. Because it was put in a climate of high rainfall and thunderstorms and downpours, which it wasn't designed for. So we fortunately at Mapungubwe we had just before, when it was nominated for the Aga Khan Award, just before the assessors went there, we had an anomaly where we had like 2 years rainfall delivered in 3 hours. It was like pouring a bucket on a model, and it survived. So, but we also need to understand that, the nature of where we're building. Yeah. And how many layers of tiles, for 20 meters, you need 5 layers of tiles. And the economy of that against using brick. And then we all look at Eladio de Este's work. Eladio de Este's work is fabulous, but he used steel, okay, as an engineer in his work. So where is it using steel? Where isn't it using steel? So where are you true to that? And the nice thing with John Uschendorf's work is he's saying, even Grand Central Station, these things had no steel in them, and they've stood there for 150 years. So it's us remaining true to it. But you're right, it's a pre-industrial thing, and without over-romanticizing that whole thing, how do you, certainly in India, but you've also got architects and Sankalpa at CEPT who's taken a lot of these things which are techniques of weaving that and had a look at how it can make structural sense at a whole nother level in high-rise buildings. So that's the sort of thinking, those are the breakthroughs we've had. So for me, Sentil's made a breakthrough in India because he's the only one I know who's now got to the point where he can build a very sophisticated, beautiful, poetic statement through all these trials and endeavors that is, part of sitting in a dining room overlooking a lake on a floating platform, and is hugely poetic and beautifully made. So, and he's available to teach other people that he, MIT are amazed with reinforcing rods that actually are catenaries as the support structure. Why didn't we ever think of that? You know, it comes out of Indian innovation, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
And, you know, if I do some experiments here, I almost need to bring him to be the foreman to do the first one, to teach. Yeah. Because implicit in his formwork resolution is the mathematics. So it almost makes the mathematician not necessary, because it gives the power back to the people. Yeah.
And also, I understand you correctly, because the way you work with the material, over a period of time, you start getting a sense of how much thick is enough, how much big, and that is a different kind of a sensibility of arriving at the sizes and the shapes and the proportion. And I think that can be developed over a period of time of dealing with making, breaking, and that's the kind of a process by which one can arrive at a sense of what dimension is correct, what proportions are sort of fine for that kind of a span, etc. There's a friend who is asking, which is a related question to what we are already talking about. You talked about a condition wherein the rain was not taken care of. Now these are essentially shell structures that we are making, and they are going to behave very nicely when they are loaded from the top. So how do they behave in case of a lateral, let's say, condition like an earthquake? Are they equally and you also said that these are not reinforced, because in Eladio, DST, and most of these peoples, they were actually reinforced, but these are not reinforced. These are purely I think unreinforced structures. So what about the seismic safety in these kind of explorations?
It's a good question. I think MIT and Cambridge have been, through their civil engineering departments, have been looking at this very thing of seismic. And lo and behold, we won the competition for Laetoli, the World Heritage Site in Tanzania, which is the oldest evidence that our hominid predecessors to being Homo sapiens were bipeds, because they were running away from a volcanic eruption and their footprints are in the sand 4.6 million years ago. And we were starting to design a museum there. The project, unfortunately, they had a change of president, and this was the previous president's project. So that's what happens. These things get put on hold. We were experimenting there with, 7 on the Richter scale in the Rift Valley. How do you create, with only a 4% footprint area, a series of like umbrellas that operate independent of one another, that move themselves? Because we all know that seismic comes in sideways like this, and then it goes up and down, and then it does a repeat performance. That's become very clear from the workshops we had in Valencia. So how can you make these series of umbrella structures that operate independently of one another and actually move? And how do you learn from Neelkanth Chai that maybe you have to go down 2 or 3 meters with loose packed stones, so that the loose packed stones actually take the thrust, not the main structure? We've got a lot to learn. And areas of the world, Chile and that, where they know how to even design high-rise buildings, but that becomes a whole nother challenge. And then obviously we also recommend using plastic mesh as part of your sandwich layer, so that it's like shatterproof glass. If it does collapse, what would you do? You can make holes in it. And, the Catalanese were very inventive, because they took a tile and then they made a sausage roll, which they put 2 ways. So they created an air gap on one of the layers, which is something we've got to experiment with, because, when we don't have excessive heat, but we have 33, 35 degrees. And you are going to get a heat transmission that actually goes through that. And the problem you have when you have a museum is they all want it to be a standard British museum, 21 degrees. But you can open a door one end and a door the other end and ventilate the whole space. But you try and talk to authorities about that. We all know about that one. But you can also allow the heat to penetrate and then drift to the top and ventilate out. There are all sorts of ways you can do it if you think on your feet, because the precedents are all there. You just got to go to Terrazzo in Spain. There's a whole city, from churches to industrial revolution buildings to power stations to everything. But the power of the euro has pulled it all out. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah. No, I think, Peter, you're right. Absolutely right about there are these challenges, and we're all working in, and there are examples of century-old in front of us. And at the same time, I think there are two ways to look at this. One, that this is in compression. And mostly in compression, most compression structures tend to work very well in seismic forces.
Yes.
And that's the art of actually the weaving of the idea of the Timbrel being a weave. A tremendous advantage, because it is able to take all forces. It's actually a weave.
Yes.
A. And B, one of the other things that we need to also, as much as very large spans will and need a certain kind of mathematics and a certain kind of, engineering of a certain kind, there is 80% or 70% of our structures are small spans. If you look at housing, if you look at, and
exactly.
if you just think about those spans, which are normal, it should not stop us from at least proceeding the first foot forward, the second foot forward. You can't just stop till the science of it needs to be, verified to a degree which needs to build dams or to build, large span airports or large span systems. There are various, and though in fact Gustavino and company, which Oschendorf that he was talking about, if you look at Gustavino's work, I mean, the brothers, they had done amazing spans that have lasted years and plus. So
yes,
I think yes, there needs to be far more data available to us for certain kinds of structures, but we can put our foot forward. There is enough with us as not.
Yes, definitely. I agree.
Yep.
So I wouldn't fear too much.
But, I don't think you're going to get that much more. When we've had workshops in Valencia, a large part of the workshops have been architects who do restorative work to historical structures that have been damaged by earthquakes in Europe. And they try and do it in such a way that if another earthquake happens, less damage is caused. Okay? And yet there's a sort of, I haven't found anyone in Spain who's has the courage of Scud, for instance, to go and do the work that he's actually doing. I mean, I know they have the problem that if they don't employ student labor, it's probably too expensive to do. So there is this thing of that the euro and the dollar have actually ruled out, and the Australian dollar have ruled out the fact that you can use this technique. Have even ruled out the fact that you can do, earth walls or anything like that, rammed earth, for instance. But we have the advantage that we actually can. And if we give people the confidence, they can build it. We just need to build 1 or 2 or 3 prototypes and evaluate the cost of it and then say, run with it. But I think they also have to be something that as part of the vernacular is valued and liked and is experientially and symbolically acceptable as well. I've seen so many, sustainable long tunnel spaces, which Northern Europeans have done in the developed world. But people go there and they say, this is for chickens, it's not for us. We're not interested in this long space. Okay, so there's that aspect as well. But and how you control light and things. But I think it's definitely an alternative way. And it's nice to see that you're on your first steps to having a look at that. And I'll take it a few further steps, and we'll get Scud to take it a few further steps. And you've got Scud as a colleague. He's a phone call away to actually say, hey, come and share your expertise on shuttering with us. Okay. And your organizational skill to get a number of workers that can actually do that. Because it sets the discipline up. Yeah. The discipline of the principle.
Right. Yeah. I think
and
you're
students
right.
find it when they look at organic work, they think it's why organic work is actually only done successfully by mature architects. It can never be done by a beginner. It takes a lifetime to have the consequence, because it actually requires more maths and more rigor to underpin what you're actually doing. Okay. And a synthesis between the body language and the language of nature, and then what is the maths you actually work into, not in terms of equations but in terms of sensibility. And we know that if we build a dome and it's got an oculus, if we then cover it with soil and mounds of earth, it will become even stronger. It can disappear. It can take that. In fact, the Timbrel Vaulting asks you to do that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. You know, you were in the end showing your book and talking about, since you've also been involved with the world of academics, and we can actually generate a lot of discussion on that also. But so I think we can have one more. The feeling that I have, Surya, is that we can have one more interview with Peter where he's just talking to us about his views on academics, teaching, and his experience of dealing with the students. So, but I think
Oh, yes.
that's and honestly, I have a lot of questions on that front also. But I think we have really taken a lot of time, and I would like to conclude here on by thanking Peter. Thank you so much for giving us your valuable time and sharing your experiences. It was wonderful.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. It was lovely. We have to be
Lovely, Surya, being with you this afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah, waiting for you.
My regards to your wife and that beautiful building you've done. Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Take care.
Yeah.
We'll keep in contact. Okay.
Surya, thank you so much, Surya. And also, I'll just like to thank the people who have joined with us on various platforms. Just a small announcement: this was the 8th interview, and we have our last interview scheduled next Saturday with a very interesting architect from Bangladesh, Rafiq Azam. The interview is at 11 a.m. in the morning, and so I hope to see you all back next Saturday. Thank you so much for joining with us.
Thank you.